You are tuned to KSQM 91.5. This is the home of the best music ever made. And every month, we always have a guest speaker. And today, I am proud to say I have Dr. Joshua Jones with me in the booth. He joined Olympic Medical Center's Physician Division as Chief Physician Officer in the fall of 2016. He is board certified general and forensic psychiatrist and a well-established physician in Clallam County. He comes to Olympic Medical Physicians after serving for 6 years as medical director at Peninsula Behavioral Health. Before we went on the air, we were talking about our military careers.
Yes, indeed.
And you were in the Army, is that correct?
I was.
Yeah, okay. So Air Force, Army, we all did our part in protecting our freedom, right?
We did. We did.
Yeah.
Some on the ground, some in the air.
Some in the ground, some in the air. That's right. So the topic that we have been discussing on the air to encourage people to tune in is kids today.
Kids today, yeah.
It is so challenging for children today. Nothing like what when you and I were growing up. We didn't have internet. We didn't have smartphones. We didn't have all that technology that can go worldwide in a moment.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that we didn't do is we didn't come right out of a very crippling pandemic that stressed all of our support systems and stressed our very concept of what it means to be isolated, what it means to be connected, especially, as our kids. For you and I, it was a blink of an eye. Let's be honest. 2-3 years, blink of an eye. When you're 6, that's half your life.
I know.
When you're 8, it's a quarter of your life.
Yeah.
So we're coming out of all that, and the data that we're getting in the scientific community and the psychiatric community around what the pandemic, the isolation, but also the adoption and reliance on the new technologies are doing to kids' mental health is pretty staggering. We're seeing significantly associated increases in rates of major depressive disorder, in rates of serious anxiety disorders, in rates of child and adolescent substance use that we've never seen before. Maybe it was because we weren't asking the right questions, but we think it's definitely been because of the pretty significant social tumult that has happened because of the pandemic, and in some degree because of some of the new technologies that have come on board in the last 10 years.
It's very difficult if you're if you're 8 years old and you're sitting in front of a computer, and your teacher's a little square on the screen, and your friends are all little squares on the screen, and you can't throw spitballs or any of that. You can't have that classroom experience, and kids are behind now, aren't they?
The kids are behind. They're behind academically. Some of the national surveys on how kids have been able to learn, especially about history and civics over the last couple of years, show significant decreases. We knew that in math and reading last year, but it's been across the board. And what's really fascinating and tragically fascinating is kind of this promise of technology and the promise of social media, which is a very, very broad term, but the promise of interconnectivity actually turning out to do somewhat of the opposite for kids. And I'm talking about the use of mass media, social networks such as Discord and Snapchat and Instagram and things like that. I think during the pandemic, we're all like, "Hey, this is great. That we may not miss a beat. We may be able to zoom our way out of the pandemic." But we found that that's really not true. And what we're seeing is that, yes, there may be some uses for social media and for technology in times when you can't have normal social engagements, but it's not a replacement for it. And once that time has passed, we need to pull back in. We need to go back to bread and butter, face-to-face human interaction and activities, and not look at social media as replacements for social interaction that we as humans have evolved to rely on over our lifespans.
Yeah. So what are some you've touched on some of them, but what are some of the other stresses that kids are facing that we haven't touched on? I didn't have any of these when I was a kid. I mean, there were no computers.
Yeah.
I'm not that old, but computers are fairly new.
Well, I think that's a really good point, and that's something to look at when you think about the scope of human history. I mean, it's kind of easy for us to conceptualize how long ago 10 years was, maybe 20 years, even 100 years. But when you start to get into the concept of 1,000 years ago, the human mind really can't grasp that. So when we look at how long our brains have had to adapt to computers, I mean, it was the mid-'80s before people were having computers that weren't connected to the internet in their homes on a routine basis.
Yeah, they were just used to play computer games.
Correct, yeah. And then in mid-'90s when the internet happened, and then social media really didn't start ticking up until the mid-2000s.
Yeah.
The stresses that kids are facing is a constant bombardment of input that's being directed to them by devices that they're carrying around in their pockets. Mm-hmm. Now, we as adults, you could argue that some of us are able to moderate how we use these things.
But it's interesting, every now and then I'll get, this is how much time you spent on your internet. And I'm going, really?
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up.
I could have cleaned my kitchen in that period.
I'm so glad you brought that up. That number, I think, is surprising to most people.
Yeah.
For a couple reasons. One is that our phones, but specifically the programs, I mean, we call them phones, but that's not really what they are. They're computers.
Yeah.
They are able to bring us right to programs, applications, social networks that really tap into what we call the flow state, which is the zone. If you've been an athlete or if you've done any kind of cooking and you're just really into the zone, these devices, these programmers, the developers who make these programs are trying to make you lose track of time, trying to get the currency of having your eyeballs on these screens as a way to generate revenue. Mm-hmm. And it's very effective, and it's really effective for kids whose brains aren't as developed, who don't have as much impulse control, who don't have as much executive functioning, who haven't put down other ways of satisfying the dopaminergic pathways, the reward pathways in the brain. These things tap right into that. And I don't think we as a society have come to grips with it. And I think we're seeing some of the ill effects. Yeah,
I know when I was stationed in Korea, they had bricks. They didn't have telephones, but they had these, looked like bricks. And that's how you communicated with people. But now they're so small. Well, for those of you that are just joining us, I have Dr. Joshua Jones in the booth with me. And we are talking about the way that media has affected kids. And it is 9 minutes past 2. Let's talk about one more topic, because I wanted for people are always tuning in. We only have listeners all over the world, so don't get too nervous.
Absolutely.
Is social media any good for kids? Are there good things about social media?
I think the answer to that is a qualified probably. I think, again, during the pandemic, we found out that there are some times when if you're without the ability to socialize in other ways, that might be an outlet, but definitely not a replacement for socialization through play, through sports, through music, through dance, through other activities. And then I think there's also a base of evidence to suggest that especially folks in marginalized communities, historically marginalized communities, it may be a way for kids to connect with others. I'm thinking specifically around folks that are dealing with issues of sexuality or gender identity, a way for folks to connect with others when they may need to stay hidden or closeted for whatever reasons to keep their own safety. So I think that there's a evidence to say that, yes, there's a benefit for folks to know that they're not alone.
I was just going to, you took the words right out of my mouth. That's why you're a psychiatrist. That's your whole job, to take words out of my mouth.
only my job's only to help you put the words into your own mouth.
Oh, spoken like a true, yes, that is good. But yeah, people that might feel like you gave a perfect example of they feel like they are the only one that is dealing with whatever their situation is. And so that is a good way for them to connect with others.
Yeah, but once that connection's made, I think we want to try to foster it outside of the virtual experience.
Yeah.
We don't have a lot of great data on to say why that is yet. I think it probably has to do with just the volume, and also before we got on the air, and I know we'll touch on this, we were talking a little bit about bullying, and cyberbullying has been in the news a lot. And I think one of the things that happens when you're in the social space is just the quantity of the inputs that you can be exposed to is so much greater than in a social setting. Anybody who's ever posted anything online or had something out in the public internet sphere knows that you can have really nasty comments immediately put on those in such high quantity, such high volume, and they hurt and they cut at a much higher volume than you would have to be exposed to if folks weren't commenting, mostly anonymously, on a social media network.
Well, you hear of young teenagers that commit suicide because of the bullying that they have undergone online. They don't even know these people.
Absolutely. And if you think of it in an hour in a social setting, perhaps you're going to be subject to 10, at most 10, 15 negative comments. A lot of positive ones too, but let's say you're at a party, 10 to 15 negative comments in an hour on social media. You can just imagine that could be multiplied 10, 20, 30 times.
Wow. Well, right now it's 13 minutes past 2. I have Dr. Joshua Jones in the booth with me right now. We are talking about social media and kids bullying.
But yeah, let's get into that a little bit more, because I think that there's some things that we can do about it.
Yeah, you hear on the news about people that teenagers that commit suicide, and the family goes, "I thought they were so happy. What happened?"
Right. And I think that's the biggest thing that I want people to take away from this today, is that we're not helpless. And the biggest thing you can do is open up lines of communication, whether you're a grandparent or a parent or a brother or sister of a child. It's a different world now. And if there's any bright spot that I've seen come out of the pandemic, it's that people are much more aware of mental health, much more aware that psychological struggles are real. They impact the body, they impact the mind, they impact the trajectory of lives, and people are much more open to talking about it. So if there's anything, if you think, God, what can I do about this? I feel so helpless. It is talk to people. It is be available. It is you as the adult, as the grandparent, as the parent, being a good role model, putting down your own phone, putting it away, taking the smartwatch off so it's not beeping at you, and giving attention to your kids. Now, are you going to be frustrated when they are in their own phones? That's right. But that's where we've got to stand up and say, put that down or take it away. Our wonderful coordinator, Penny Robinson, asked me during the break, how do we navigate this with our own kids? Very poorly. You have to stand up and you have to say, you need to put that down. We need to talk. We need to do something together as a family. I get it. You'd love to be in that phone. You know, when we've had to have restrictions, or I know when other folks have had to have restrictions and take away their kid's phone, it takes a couple days to not detox, that's the wrong word, but to adjust to not having that constant stimulation. But it's worth it at the end. And then you have to come to the question of, gosh, do we introduce it back? How much screen time is too much time? And I think that's an individualized answer for every family. But therein lies the problem, is it's not a one-size-fits-all. You have to be communicating with your kids. You have to be with your kids and grandkids. You have to be engaged with them. You have to be able to say, enough's enough early on, not when it gets to a crisis point. But, hey, maybe we don't let you have Instagram. Maybe we don't let you have Snapchat. And I know that's a challenge because it's everywhere, and because it's everywhere, it seems normalized.
Well, sometimes families, when they're having dinner, they say the phone goes, turn your phone off, or put your phone in a basket off to the side so that you actually look at each other. And I know when I've seen parents take their kids to swim lessons, and the kids are so proud of what they've done, and their parent doesn't see it because they are looking at their phone.
Brutal. It's brutal.
And you just see that crestfallen look on the child's face when they look up and hear their parent is looking down, and it's like, my mom didn't see me.
Yes. Yeah, I've seen that too. I'm sure that I have done that to my child, and it's brutal, and it's something that we need to be very aware of. Did you want to mention?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
I brought something in that I thought was quite interesting.
Boy, you sure did. And the English had the coronation of King Charles last week, and Prince George, the little grandson, didn't want to be bullied, and so he didn't want to wear the traditional tights out of fear of being made fun of at school. What the Daily Mail reported, wasn't keen on wearing tights and becoming a subject of ribaldry at school. But this is the most important thing, Susan, is the last line of this little blurb. King Charles agreed with his grandson, and the breeches and tights were replaced with trousers. And I think that is so key. That's a great grandfather. That is someone who spent the time to listen to the child, hear them, and put aside, what wasn't important for what was important.
Yeah.
This kid's feelings. I mean, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. I thought that. And so the thing that caught my attention was that this is the royalty of Great Britain. They're supposed to be so strong and stoic and be able to do anything, but that grandson, he was afraid that he was going to be bullied.
Yes, he was.
Yeah.
Yes, he was. And he had the space in that family to speak out and say that. And he got listened to by arguably the most important person in their family. And that's, I think, the biggest key here is that's the level of importance that you as a grandparent, you as a parent, have for your kid. The decisions that you make on a moment-to-moment basis, not to put any pressure on anybody, really important to these kids. They see that, and when they are heard and when they are validated, it just increases self-confidence.
Yeah.
It increases their ability and willingness to communicate with you. And that is how we break down barriers to talking about being bullied, talking about having depressive feelings, talking about, God forbid, if you get to the ultimate consequence of feeling suicidal.
Yeah.
That's
I know
how we
a family that we know, their son is grown now, but at bedtime they would say, "What was good about today?"
Oh, and there's a ton of scientific evidence behind the power of gratitude, of denoting, saying out loud, the power of saying out loud. What was good about your day does indeed decrease rates of depression, which I think is just remarkable.
Yeah. Okay, it is 23 minutes past 2. You're tuned to KSQM 91.5. I have Dr. Joshua Jones in the booth with me. Let's see. Let's talk about, we have a few more minutes. We're going to have the senior report at 2:30. Drugs are still bad, right? What should we know about the latest ways to approach our kids and grandkids about drugs and alcohol?
Yes, drugs are still bad for the most part. I don't want to say anything as absolutes, but absolutely. I mean, when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, we had the DARE program, which was Dare to Keep Kids Off Drugs, and that was born out of Nancy Reagan's Just Say No, which we know now, looking back, that kind of pure abstinence mentality, no allowance for a slip up, no allowance for an experimentation. That really wasn't healthy for our society. It really just helped people hide things or put them in boxes and not come forward and say, I need help, as we were talking to them. But the overwhelming evidence is that exposure to kids' growing and maturing brains by drugs and alcohol don't lead to good outcomes. They lead to an increase in mental illness. They lead to an increase in folks living below the poverty line. It doesn't work. So yes, drugs and alcohol are still not good for kids to expose their brains to. Brains really don't stop maturing until about the age of 25, and so we want to discourage that as much as possible. But we also want to create a space for our kids to ask questions, for them to admit they've slipped up, for them to admit that they've used, for them to admit that they need help.
There was an article in the paper, my husband brought it to my attention, that they have done a study that teenagers that used marijuana had a higher incident of psychiatric problems.
Yeah, and that's absolutely true. And I think that's one of I was born and raised in Washington State, left it for a few years to train, and then came back. So I've been witness, as a lot of us have, to Washington State's journey through its relationship with marijuana, and now it's legal. And I think for a lot of people, legal equals safe. That's not true. The use of marijuana, especially in the teenage years, is associated with an increased rate of the development of schizophrenia, which is a very serious mental condition. Not that we can say for sure that marijuana causes schizophrenia, we can't, but the correlation or the association is definitely there. And then it's also associated with a higher increased risk of completed suicide than folks who don't use marijuana. One of the really important things to remember about marijuana is it's not the same as it was 30 years ago. Through good old-fashioned science, selective breeding, the concentration of the psychoactive substances, primarily THC, in cannabis has significantly increased over the years. And, it's a commercially available product. It's intended to do that. And for folks who want to enjoy it responsibly as adults, that it is legal for them to do so. But for kids, there's not any evidence to suggest that there's a positive benefit to it in mental health. There are some medicinal uses for it in some kids who have intractable seizure conditions, but that's really not what we're talking about when we're talking about most kids who use cannabis or other products.
We are talking about how the past few years have taken a heavy toll on all of us, but especially young people. And we've been talking about youth mental health and how we can help our kids and grandkids. While the senior report was playing, we were talking about what was it that the Surgeon General said, that loneliness is at an epidemic?
An epidemic,
right now?
Yeah. The Surgeon General put out a report just recently equating to the effects of loneliness and isolation on the body being equivalent to smoking a pack of cigarettes or more a day on the human body. So that's just really incredible. And I think you said it best. Get outside and play. That's one of the things that we can do independent of anything else to help kids with their mental health. Recent studies have shown that an actual treatment, not just something that might help, but a treatment for major depressive disorder in adolescence is regular exercise each day. And it doesn't have to be that you've joined a gym and are on a weightlifting program. It doesn't have to be that you are part of the high school basketball team or what have you. Just getting outside or inside and playing, running around, not even having heart rate targets, but just regular exercise for kids independently helps treat depression. I think that's incredible.
You don't have to go out there and don't have a phone in your hand while you're doing Wordle or whatever. I tried to do that. I can't. I just like to get outside and enjoy the fresh air and get a dog. The dog will make sure you get outside and get some exercise.
Well, for you adults who can make those choices and get yourselves pets, that's absolutely true. Yeah. That has also been shown to increase mental wellness in humans.
Because you have someone that is relying on you. When you have a pet, that pet is relying on you to feed them, to walk them, to take care of them. So you feel needed.
Well,
we all need to feel needed.
That's one of the theories as to why pet ownership is so good for humans. I personally think it's because they're just so cute.
Aren't they cute? Okay, so what else? Let me see. How has the pandemic affected kids' mental health?
Yeah, rates.
We addressed that earlier, but
right.
I think it's worth addressing.
Well,
again.
I think it's really important because we've learned so much about it. The rates of depression and the rates of anxiety disorders have really skyrocketed. The presentation of kids at the emergency departments throughout the country increased during the pandemic. Folks were just, trying to reach for help any way they could, and it was just kind of difficult to figure out what to do about it. I'm just so thankful that now we have a one-stop number for mental crises. Recently, the 988 number, and that's it. That's all there is. 988 is the emergency crisis number for folks in mental health crises. And you can call that, and you can talk to a trained mental health professional. The local Western Washington line is run by the Volunteers of America. They have fabulous people who do that. I've called that number before to get assistance with the mental health crisis. You don't have to be at the end of your rope, so to speak. You can just be needing to brush up on your crisis plan, or just down and ask, hey, where can I go to get help? They are there to help you get through the muck of trying to figure out how the sausage gets made and actually get some help for yourself. So that 988 number is absolutely fabulous. They are also hooked up with our local mental health resources. We have a fabulous local community mental health center called Peninsula Behavioral Health that has offices in Port Angeles and Sequim, and they've got great resources for kids. They have some special state-funded programs that provide intensive wraparound services for kids. But more than that, I mean, it doesn't need to be like an ongoing thing. If you've got a kid with a mental health crisis who feels really down, who's very isolated, who even talks about, some of the softer signs of thinking about suicide. I don't want to be here anymore. I'm not worth anything to anybody. They're folks you can reach out to and get some assistance and figure out,
So if you call this 988 number, where are those people located?
That's a great question. I don't know. They could be located anywhere. That the magic of technology is that they could be anywhere.
Because I'm always interested when I make an online, I call to order something.
Yeah.
And I'm always intrigued. Where are you? And they could be in Arizona. They could be in New Hampshire. You never know.
You never know, and I think that's one of the. Well, we were racking our brains to think of some of the positives of technology, and that's one of them. Is that they can spread a concentrated resource all the way out here to the rural parts of the country. And boy, I tell you, the 988 folks are great. I think people really should use it. It's a wonderful emergency phone number that we have now that complements the 911 system. 988
is the emergency crisis. So that is the number that you dial. Boy, now I'm showing my age. Dial. Whoa, boy, that you call. There, we don't have. I don't think I have a rotary phone in my house. They're all push button now. But 988 is the crisis line.
Yep. Yes, it is.
For no matter how small you think your issue is, you need to seek out help.
Yeah, if you don't have another place to go, they're there for you, and they do a great job.
Yeah. So as we were talking before we went on break, we were talking about suicide. What are some signs that people should look for if someone is contemplating suicide?
Yeah, really good.
Back up just a little bit. There you go.
I certainly will.
Yeah, okay.
Really, really good question. And, there's a lot of classical signs that you'll hear that are somewhat true. If someone who's been really depressed starts to give away possessions or starts, certainly writes letters or starts to talk about suicide, those are key signs. But I think what's more, one of the issues I have with what are the signs that someone may commit suicide is that we need to not be looking for signs, and we need to be having the conversations with people. So I think the most important thing to know about talking to somebody about suicide is that you're not putting the idea into somebody's head. I think there's an old school idea that you don't ask somebody about suicide because then you're suggesting it, and then they might follow through. There's no scientific evidence to support that. If you're concerned enough that somebody's having suicidal thoughts, they've probably already had them. You're not going to put them into your head. And so it's quite all right to ask somebody, hey, I'm concerned about you. Are you having any thoughts that you might not want to be here, or that you might want to die, or that you might want to kill yourself? That's okay. And that's what we have to get to. More than looking at signs of, oh gosh, are they thinking about suicide, is let's get to the point where we can ask each other that question and not have it be a thing. Just have it be, I'm worried about you. Here's what I'm seeing. Can we talk about it? Can we get you some help? And have it be okay to have the answer be, I have been thinking about that. I'm not going to do anything right now. I'm not going to act on them. But yeah, thanks for asking me, and let's figure out the next step in the plan of how I get help, so I can drift more away from having those thoughts.
Because once again, on the internet and on the news, it talks about kids that seem to be happy. They're cheerleaders. They have lots of friends, and suddenly, because of cyberbullying, they are just overwhelmed with sadness, and they go, I just can't deal with this anymore.
Super true. Yeah, super true. And that's where it becomes so important. I think that's been the theme of our whole hour, about communication and having an open communication, so kids aren't afraid or ashamed to say to you, a trusted adult, hey, I'm not okay. I'm having thoughts of suicide. And I think another thing our society has to come to grips with is the idea that you can be both at the same time. You can be a grade A honor student and have thoughts that you would be better off dead. That happens. That happens all the time, and it needs to be okay for those both to be true at the same time.
Wow. I think of all the things that kids are faced with nowadays that I never even had to think about. My biggest thing was I was tall, and so people would make fun of my height. But there was no internet, there was no, Snapchat, there was nothing of that.
Right.
And now these kids are inundated all the time.
Right. Yeah. It's daunting, but it's not unsolvable. And we need to act, and we need to not pretend like this new technology is harmless. It's not completely harmful, but it's like any other tool. I mean, a hammer is a deadly weapon in the wrong hands, but it's also a great tool to build things. That's what this technology can be. We just have to agree together to self-regulate, to regulate the use of this technology for those kids, for our charges, who aren't really able to regulate it themselves, and be okay if they don't like us for it.
Yeah, we have to be the adults.
We have to be the adults.
Sometimes it's kind of hard to be the adults because we want to just pretend that problem isn't there, but someone has to take charge and be the grown-up.
Correct.
You can't be your it's good to be a friend to your child, but they really need parents.
That's right. Yeah, and my kids they roll their eyes. They roll their eyes at me when I say this. When I say, "I'm not your friend.
Yeah,
we're friendly, but I'm your parent."
Yeah, and so I need to give you the direction and the guidance and the protection to make sure that you stay safe.
Correct, and augment what your brain doesn't have yet. Your brain's still developing, and that's okay.
Yeah. Well, right now it is 8 minutes to 3. You're tuned to KSQM 91.5. I have Dr. Joshua Jones in the booth with me, and we've been talking about mental health for youth. What we have about, 4 or 5 more minutes. If someone has just joined us and they haven't had the opportunity to hear the whole while I'm thinking of it, for any While Working on Wellness workshop, if you have not been able to listen to them, you can go to ksqmfm.com and click on the Listen Live link, and all of these will eventually get on the SoundCloud. I know I've done that. When I've wanted to listen to one of the presenters and I've been busy with something else, is a wealth of information that we are so pleased to do for the community. So did I do good, Penny? So what reminders would you like to give parents and grandparents out there? Let's have kind of a rah-rah. Okay, this is what we need to do. Let's kind of give them a cookbook of pieces of the puzzle to help them be better parents and grandparents.
Oh, great.
For kids.
Great. Let's just do 3 steps.
Okay.
Number 1, talk and listen to your kids and grandkids regularly, every day if you can, and have it really be the focus really be on communicating. Number 2, put the phones down. Everybody, get them out of your sight, get them off your person, get them out of the room. Spend some quality time with just you folks. And 3, remember the 988 number. Let's keep that on the forefront of our brains. It's there. It's useful. If you don't have any other help, that's a great place. That's a great place when you're in a mental health crisis.
So by talking to our kids or grandkids, validating their concerns, you're not saying you're stupid. What do you mean you don't know the answer to that? No one has the answer to everything. We're all working through this maze at the same time.
Right.
So talk and listen. Put the phones down.
Right.
Put them away. And I love the 988. I have not heard of the 988 number.
It's relatively new. It's a great innovation.
Okay.
And it saved lives.
And that's the most important thing. Well, Dr. Joshua Jones, it has been an honor. I understand this is what, your 6th or 7th time of being in the booth here?
Every time is a joy.
And I feel honored that I was in the booth to interview you. We'll have to send Olive away more often. But she isn't here today, so I'm sitting in for her. And Dr. Jones has given us a lot of helpful hints in helping to deal with youth mental health and to help our kids and grandkids. This is a presentation. Working on Wellness is a health education program of Dungeness Valley Health and Wellness Clinic, SQUIM's free clinic. And that clinic provides basic urgent care and chronic health care services to uninsured community members. They are open Mondays and Thursdays. On Mondays and Thursdays, the doors open at 4:30 in the afternoon, and they're located at 777 North 5th Avenue here in SQUIM. So 3 steps: talk and listen to your children, grandchildren, put the phones down, and 988.
You got it.
Great that you have. I like the 3 steps. That's a good way. In the military, we would say, tell them, then tell them what you just told. No, tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them what you just told them.
Absolutely.
Just repeat as often as necessary. Thank you very much for coming and joining us, Dr. Jones, and the song that he's requested that we're going to play to take us to 3 o'clock. He said that he wants to have this played whenever he enters the room. Okay, this is John Williams' Indiana Jones theme song. Everyone knows this song. KSQM 91.5.